gather round, and hush the clamor of the modern world. Let me tell you of a time when cities were forests of brick and ambition, and a man's worth was measured by the weight of his silence, not the spark of his ideas. This is the tale of Elias, a boy who heard the secret songs in broken things. It begins in the soot-stained shadow of a great ironworks, in a town that worshipped the finished product and despised the flaw. Here, a boy's gift for listening would be seen as a defiance, his gentle hands a betrayal of his father's stern world. Prepare for a story of fire and forgiveness, where a discarded son must learn to forge not just metal, but the very soul of a community that once threw him away. The town of Iron Cross lived and died by the rhythm of the foundry's great whistle. Its streets were paved with coal dust, its air tasted of cinder and ambition. Elias's father, Gareth, was a foreman, a man of grit and unyielding principle, whose world was built on blueprints and tonnage. Elias, however, was a whisper in the cacophony. His hands, small and clever, were drawn not to the might of molten steel, but to the cast-off fragments in the scrap yard. A gear with 3 teeth missing, a pressure valve singing a faint, persistent hiss, a length of copper wire coiled like a sleeping snake. He would collect these wounded pieces, arranging them on his windowsill, as if listening for their stories. Garrett saw this as a dangerous frivolity. "A man who chases 2 rabbits catches neither," he'd growl, believing his son's focus should be on learning the robust trades of the forge, the only future he deemed worthy. But Elias found his teachers elsewhere. In the dim corner of the town's library, an elderly, retired engineer named Mr. Alden fed the boy's restless mind with tales of Da Vinci's machines and the lost arts of clockwork. "Remember, lad," Mr. Alden would say, tapping a dusty blueprint, "the axe forgets the tree, but the tree remembers the axe." Every act of creation, he implied, leaves a memory in the material. Elias's mother, Clara, a woman worn quiet by life, would sometimes place a hand on his shoulder as he tinkered, her touch a silent affirmation. This quiet encouragement was the first kindling of his perception, a virtue that saw potential where others saw only junk. As Elias grew, the chasm between his father's expectations and his own nature became a gulf. Where other boys took pride in the weight of a sledgehammer, Elias marveled at the precise tension in a watch spring. Garrett's pride, a heavy mantle of responsibility and reputation, curdled into acute anxiety. He had secured a coveted apprenticeship for Elias at the main forge under the harsh Master Branwell, a position meant to secure the family's standing and beat the softness out of the boy. He presented it as a decree over a dinner gone cold. Elias felt the walls of his future slam shut, thick and fire-blackened. That night, Elias dreamed of his maternal grandfather, a locksmith named Henry, whom he'd never met. In the dream, Grandfather Henry stood in a vast, silent workshop filled not with tools, but with thousands of suspended, broken mechanisms, pendulums stilled, gears frozen mid-turn. The old man didn't speak, but with a gentle breath, he fogged the face of a shattered pocket watch. In the condensation, a single intricate path of golden light appeared, connecting the broken parts. Elias woke, his heart pounding. The ancestors' guidance was clear. His path lay in revealing the hidden connections, the unseen circuits within the broken. The virtue of courage began as a small, cold ember in his chest, waiting for the bellows of necessity to make it blaze. The confrontation erupted on the first day of the apprenticeship. Master Branwell, a man with a voice like grinding stone, set Elias to the brutal, mind-numbing task of sorting scrap by sheer weight and density. When Elias, studying a beautifully complex but fractured differential gear, dared to ask about its original function and possible repair, Branwell's face purpled. "Your function is to sort, not to think," he roared, hurling the gear into the slag pile. That evening, Elias told his father he could not return, that the work was murdering something essential in him. Garrett's face, a mask of fury and profound shame, turned to stone. The air in their small home cracked. "Then you are no son of this house," he declared, his words a hammer blow. To disown a child was to speak a word that could not be unsaid, like spilling mercury, impossible to gather back. The word he used, cast off. echoed in the silent room. With it, he severed the bond. Elias, stripped of his name and place, turned to leave. His mother, Clara, met his eyes for a fleeting second, a look of bottomless sorrow and a fierce, gleaming spark of pride. It was her only blessing. That night, Elias wrapped a small bundle, a change of clothes, his grandfather's old calipers, and a few of his most precious scraps. He left as the foundry's pre-dawn whistle screamed, his shadow a thin, lonely line stretching toward the rail yard. The city of Millhaven was a roaring beast of industry after Iron Cross's grim monotony. The orderly shift whistles were replaced by a constant, chaotic din of machinery, shouts, and clattering wagons. Elias, alone and adrift, felt his courage shrink. He found a bed in a squalid boarding house for transients, sharing a room with 3 other hollow-eyed men. He took whatever work he could, loading freight, scrubbing grease from factory floors, his curious fingers now permanently grimed and cracked. Yet, his nature persisted. He noticed how the dockworkers used complex knots to secure different loads, a language of rope and tension. He saw how an old street vendor kept his rickety food cart moving with a carefully placed shim and a daily drop of oil. Elias's first city lesson was in adaptability. When the music changes, so does the dance, he recalled. He began to learn the new music, the rhythms of commerce, the slang of the railmen, the hierarchy of the machine shops. He was a seed in a crack of granite, searching for the faintest trace of sustaining soil. His turning point came at a vast locomotive works, where he was hired as a sweeper. Mountains of metal shavings, worn-out pistons, and fractured coupling rods were destined for the smelter. To Elias, this wasn't waste. It was a library of failed functions, a museum of stress fractures. During his breaks, he began to sort through the piles, not by material, but by failure, items that failed from fatigue, from impact, from poor casting. An old Scotsman named Dougal, a night watchman with a bristling white mustache and eyes that missed nothing, watched him. "Ye see the story in the break, lad," he stated one evening, his voice like gravel. He told Elias of the old smith's belief that a tool which broke an honest service held a kind of honor, its spirit wanting to be liberated and reshaped into its next purpose. "A thing that has held force or carried a load is never truly spent," Dougal said. This philosophy of sacred utility ignited Elias. He began, in secret, to take the best pieces to his cramped room. With scavenged tools, he started not just repairing, but combining, marrying a still-strong piston head to a sound valve assembly from a different engine altogether, creating something new from 2 broken histories. Elias's hybrid creations caught the eye of a shift boss not with admiration, but with theft. Dragged before the works manager, a severe man named Mr. Pendleton, Elias expected to be jailed. Instead, he laid his small collection of fused parts on the desk and explained not just what they were, but why each original piece had failed, and how his hybrid solved both weaknesses. Pendleton, a practical engineer at heart, was intrigued. "The gauges on the boiler presses are unreliable," he challenged. "They stick, they lag. Fix your eyes on that." For days, Elias studied the complex, temperamental gauges. He realized the issue wasn't the gauge itself, but the capillary tubing that fed its steam pressure. It clogged with mineral scale. He remembered a discarded medical syringe in the trash, its fine glass tube clear. He proposed a new, modular design with a clear, replaceable sight glass section. The foreman scoffed, but Pendleton authorized a test. The new gauges provided crystal clear, reliable readings. The virtue of diagnostic observation, honed by listening to scrap, had saved the works a small fortune in blown seals. Elias was moved from the broom to the repair shed. In the repair shed, Elias entered a cathedral of broken giants. He learned the language of stress fractures and metal fatigue. His hands grew skilled with torch and lathe, but his heart remained with the act of creative salvage. He spent his first real wages on a proper set of files and a small brazing torch. At night, in his now slightly better room, he worked on his own projects, whimsical yet functional kinetic sculptures. A fan powered by a candle's heat, a clock driven by dripping water. He began to haunt Millhaven's flea markets and junkyards, seeking not just parts, but knowledge. He found the old tinkers, the men who could repair anything with a bit of wire and intuition. They taught him the unspoken rules, the alchemy of different solders, the temper of reclaimed spring steel, the way to listen to a bearing by spinning it. Knowledge is a garden you never finish planting, one grizzled tinker told him. Elias tended his garden with relentless curiosity, his virtue of perseverance growing with every new skill mastered. Elias's reputation as a whisperer of metal spread in the works. But attention bred resentment. A veteran fitter named Broderick, who had ruled the repair shed for 20 years, saw the boy's rise as an insult to hard-earned, traditional skill. Broderick began a campaign of subtle hostility, misplacing Elias's specialty tools, pouring water on his coal forge, mocking his careful methods as girls work. Elias considered retreating into silence. Then he remembered a story Mr. Alden had told of the great oak and the reed in the storm. The mighty oak resisted and was torn from the earth. The slender reed bent and survived. The lesson was resilience, not of brute strength, but of strategic flexibility. Instead of confronting Broderick with anger, Elias began to ask him for advice on the older, more temperamental steam fittings only Broderick understood. Flattered and disarmed, the older man's hostility slowly gave way to a gruff mentorship. Elias learned that respect in this new world, as in the old, was often earned through the humility to acknowledge another's mastery. A new desire grew in Elias, to create not just functional fixes, but objects of narrative beauty. Using scavenged brass, copper, and polished steel, he built a magnificent desk lamp. Its base was a repurposed locomotive whistle, its arm articulated like a piston rod, and its shade was made from etched boilerplate depicting the skyline of Millhaven. It was a story of industry, rendered with elegance. He sold it to a wealthy merchant visiting the works, earning more than a month's wages in one transaction. This was a seismic shift. His craft had become a legitimate enterprise. He saw a vision. His work could tell stories of transformation, of hidden beauty in the industrial, of memory preserved in metal. He rented a tiny storefront with a cellar workshop in a slightly better district. He painted a simple sign, the Salvaged Heart, mending and making. His first act was not to sell, but to forge a small, beautiful hinge from the brass of his first soldered repair and the iron of a nail from his old home's roof. He installed it on his workshop door. It was a ritual of synthesis, honoring the two worlds that had shaped him. The merchant spread the word. Soon, Elias had commissions for unique fireplace tools, custom door handles, for a new bank, and a centerpiece for a gallery. But a prominent architect offered him a lucrative, repetitive contract. Produce 50 identical, ornate brass railings for a luxury hotel. Elias tried. The first 10 were perfect. But by the 15th, his spirit revolted. The act of mindless replication felt like a betrayal. The same fire that forges the sword can soften the blade, he thought. The commission that would solidify his business could also anneal his creative spirit. With a nervous stomach, he told the architect he could not complete the order, that his work was inherently unique. The architect left in a huff, calling him a prima donna. Elias sat amid his failed business venture, wondering if integrity was a luxury he couldn't afford. The lesson, however painful, was one of artistic fidelity. He would succeed on his own terms or not at all. In the wake of this failure, Elias was forced to define what the Salvaged Heart truly was. It was not a factory, it was a philosophy. He began visiting the poorest districts, the soot warrens, where men who had been injured in the mills or replaced by younger hands sat idle, their skills deemed obsolete. He saw not poverty, but dormant abundance. He approached a group of them with a proposal. He would provide workspace, tools, and salvage materials. He would teach them advanced repair and artistic metalwork. They would share the profits from what they created and restored together. They met him with deep skepticism. "Why share your bread with strangers?" one man, a former riveter named Art, muttered. But Elias worked alongside them, his hands as soot-stained and skilled as theirs. He shared stories of Iron Cross as they worked, and they shared their hard-won wisdom. A fellowship fragile as a new weld, began to form around the anvil. This was the birth of his different model, where the first investment was not capital, but fellowship and shared purpose. The collective's first collection was born from this fellowship. They called it Phoenix Standard, a line of household items. Lamps, tools, shelves, and decorative pieces, each made from identifiable salvage parts, each bearing the subtle marks of its past life. Elias, remembering the market stalls of his childhood, set up a booth at a bustling crosstown ferry terminal. He attached a small tag to each piece, telling its story, arm from a 1892 press brake, housing from a Sutton steam pump, rivets from the Old North Bridge. They would meet the technical demands without surrendering their artistic sovereignty. It was a crucial lesson in maintaining integrity on a global scale. Despite professional success, Elias's personal life was a hollow chamber. He had no sweetheart, no family of his own, his past a landscape of scorched earth. One evening, after a long day resolving a delicate weld, a profound isolation settled on him. In his quiet loft above the workshop, he took out his grandfather's calipers and the few smooth stones he'd kept from a creek near Iron Cross. He arranged them in a circle and lit a single lantern, performing a solitary, wordless ritual of remembrance. He sent his thoughts out to the silence, to Grandfather Henry, to Clara. "I am building a workshop," he whispered to the empty air, "but who will inherit its warmth?" That night, he dreamed of the birch tree. Its branches were full of chattering, brightly plumed birds, but its trunk stood solitary. A voice on a soot-tinged breeze that sounded like old Dougal whispered, "A tree isn't lonely 'cause it stands alone. It's lonely if it forgets its part o' the whole forest." He awoke with a clarified heart. His family was the one he was forging. Art, Leo, Mo, the network of scavengers and clients. The ancestors' guidance reshaped his understanding of belonging, easing the old, sharp loneliness. His kin were those who shared his fire. Silas Croft, thwarted economically, launched a smear campaign in the industrial trade papers. He suggested the Salvaged Heart was a dilettante's hobby, that its pieces were structurally unsound folk art, and that Elias exploited broken men for sentimental profit. The whisper stung, seeding doubt among some newer patrons. Elias knew a defensive pamphlet would seem petty. Instead, he declared an open forge day. He invited the public, the press, engineers, and even skeptical city aldermen into the warehouse. People saw the clean, organized workspace, the shared lunch table, the ledger open on the wall, showing the transparent profit-sharing formula. They saw the apprentice corner, where the men's sons and daughters could learn basic drafting. Elias gave no speeches. He let the ring of hammers and the visible dignity of the work speak. "The eye believes itself, the ear believes other people," he recalled. The event turned the tide of opinion. Croft's accusations crumbled against the observable reality of skill, fairness, and pride. Elias learned the supreme power of transparency as an antidote to poison. The business now demanded knowledge beyond the forge. Elias was drowning in contracts, tariffs, and complex orders. A young woman named Beatrice Walsh answered his advertisement for a bookkeeper. Sharp-eyed and fiercely principled, she was the daughter of a union organizer and believed in their motto. She brought order to the chaos of numbers. Under her guidance, Elias began to see finance not as a cold abstraction, but as the framework for sustainability and justice. She helped him institute a revolutionary structure. After material costs, 50% of profits were shared equally among the working members. 30% were reinvested into the business and a community fund, and 20% formed a brotherhood fund for injury, illness, or old age. This was his economic ritual, a covenant of care etched in ledgers. It ensured growth nourished the roots as reliably as it displayed the blossoms. It was the virtue of equitable justice, made manifest in steel and copper. A crisis found its way to him via a railman's tale. A catastrophic boiler failure had occurred at the Iron Cross foundry, not in the main plant, but in the pump house that supplied water for cooling and for the workers' housing. The explosion killed 2 men and crippled the water supply. The town was paralyzed, its lifeblood cut off. The news struck Elias like a physical blow. Visions of his father's men he'd known since boyhood, suffering from thirst and injury, of Gareth perhaps standing helpless amid the ruin, filled him with a turbulent storm of emotions. The men of the cooperative saw his distress. "We should take up a collection, send funds for repairs," Art urged. But Elias hesitated. Sending charity to Iron Cross felt like throwing a handful of screws at a broken engine, ineffectual and vaguely insulting. He remembered his father's pride, a fortress that would repel a direct gift from the cast-off. He needed a solution, not a donation. After a night pacing before the forge, he devised a plan. He instructed Beatrice to use the community fund to purchase the most advanced portable steam-powered water pumps available, and to crate up a selection of their sturdiest, most reliable Phoenix standard tools. They would be a gift, but not an anonymous one. The crates would bear the stamp of the Salvaged Heart and a simple note, "For Iron Cross, from those who remember the whistle." The arrival of the powerful modern pumps and the crates of superlative tools in Iron Cross caused a seismic stir. The town council, dominated by men like Gareth, was thrown into turmoil. Some saw it as the ultimate humiliation, a lavish handout from the prodigal. "He's rubbing our faces in it," one foreman shouted. Others, desperate to restore water and repair the damaged sections, argued for pragmatic acceptance. Gareth sat through the meeting in granite silence, his internal war raging. Finally, the dire human need overrode brittle honor. The pumps were deployed. As clean water began to flow again, the physical relief started to soften attitudes. The tools distributed to the surviving repair crews were acknowledged even by the staunchest traditionalists as damn fine kit. Elias's calculated act was a profound lesson in pragmatic compassion. It solved an urgent crisis while forcing the town and his father to confront the undeniable competence and substance of the world he had built. Back in Millhaven, Elias's robust model began attracting a new kind of investor, philanthropic capitalists. A consortium led by a forward-thinking heiress, Mrs. Abigail Thorne, visited. She was less interested in sheer return than in scaling virtue. She proposed funding the establishment of satellite Salvaged Heart workshops in other industrial cities, creating a network of cooperatives. The offer was staggering. It meant his philosophy could replicate, could become a movement. Elias spent a week in quiet deliberation, walking the docks, listening to the city's layered rhythms. He sought the counsel of old Dougal, now retired and frail. "Lad," the Scotsman wheezed, "a single flame can light a room. 100 flames can light a city. But you must tend your own flame, or you'll not know the quality of the light you're sending out." The warning was about discernment. Growth was good, but not at the cost of diluting the core ethos. Elias negotiated a partnership where he would personally help select and train the lead craftsman for each new workshop, ensuring the soul of the model traveled with its blueprints. The first satellite workshop opened in Pittsburgh, a heartland of steel. Elias went himself with Art and Leo. They lived there for 2 months, selecting local men from the unemployed, teaching not just techniques, but the rituals, the morning anvil ring, the story sharing, the profit sharing structure. They faced resistance from established steelworks unions who saw them as a threat. Elias invited their representatives in, demonstrating how the cooperative could exist alongside unions, offering a different path for craftsmen, and actually creating a market for salvaged industrial material. He used the proverb, "One bell cannot make a carillon." Harmony, he argued, came from different tones working in concert. The Pittsburgh workshop took root, its style incorporating the robust, muscular aesthetic of the local mills, a powerful new expression of the philosophy. With expansion, Elias's time became his most precious and scarce commodity. He was constantly traveling, negotiating, planning. Returning to the main workshop after a week away, he walked to his personal forge, cold and tidy. He lit it, heated a bar of iron, and tried to shape a simple leaf. His hands, now more accustomed to shaking hands and signing papers, felt clumsy and slow. A wave of profound melancholy washed over him. Was he becoming the very thing he had fled? A manager disconnected from the making? That evening, he instituted a new non-negotiable rule: Forge Friday. One full day each week, he would work in any of the workshops, not as a founder, but as a metalsmith. His hands needed the memory of the hammer. His spirit needed the meditation of the fire. This personal ritual became his spiritual ballast, a weekly return to his source. It taught him the critical leadership virtue of groundedness, that authority must forever drink from the well of direct practice. The Pittsburgh success led to more workshops in Detroit, Buffalo, St. Louis. The Salvaged Heart became a recognized movement. Awards and national recognition followed. Elias found himself at banquets, under chandeliers, speaking about ethical industry. In these glittering moments, he felt a stark duality. The celebrated poet of the piston was a persona. The real Elias was the man with soot under his nails at the anvil. He guarded his essence fiercely, never letting applause become the rhythm he marched to. He used his platform to tell the stories of the men, Art's redemption, Leo's precision, Mo's ingenuity. He always ended his addresses the same way. I am not a founder of a company. I am a smith in a fellowship of makers. My hammer is only one. This public humility, rare in the halls of commerce, became his most disarming and powerful trait, embodying the saying, "Still waters run deep." True influence, he demonstrated, came not from volume, but from depth and consistency. In Iron Cross, the presence of the Salvaged Heart became an inescapable fact. A younger man from the town, Elias's own nephew Tom, left to apprentice in the new Detroit workshop. He returned months later with good wages, a confident bearing, and stories of a place where craftsmen had a direct stake and a voice. He spoke to Gareth not with defiance, but with earnest admiration. "Granda, it's like nothing I've ever seen." They work with each other, not just for someone. And it all started with Uncle Elias. Gareth listened, his old heart a battlefield of regret and stubborn pride. The anvil of his shame had been struck by the clean water his town drank, by the superior tools his men reluctantly admired, by the undeniable, substantive success of the son he had rejected. The fortress walls began to crack not from a siege, but from a slow, internal thaw he could no longer deny. He took a long walk to the slag heaps, the barren monument to the foundry's waste. He stood there, and for the first time, he wondered what it would cost him to rebuild what he had broken, and if he had the courage to pick up a new set of tools. The final test of the model's integrity came from within the network. The Detroit workshop, under a charismatic but ambitious lead named Carver, began to cut corners to maximize profits for reinvestment, subtly pressuring his men to speed up and compromise their Salvaged Heart standard. When reports of inconsistent quality filtered back, Elias did not send a letter. He went to Detroit. He called a meeting and, without accusation, asked Carver to walk him through their process. The flaws became self-evident under Elias's quiet, knowledgeable gaze. Elias didn't fire Carver. He sat with him and recited their founding credo: "We don't hide the break. We honor it by making it part of a new, stronger whole. Hiding a flaw is the true break." He then worked alongside the Detroit crew for a week, re-establishing the standards. The virtue he enforced was authenticity. The brand was not a logo. It was a lived promise. Carver, humbled and re-centered, became one of the network's most rigorous leaders. Gareth's internal thaw moved him to action, but not toward Elias. Instead, he began a solitary, secret project. In the dead of night, in his home workshop, he started forging a gate. Not a simple gate, but an intricate, monumental one meant for the main entrance of the Iron Cross foundry, which had never had more than a functional iron barrier. He used traditional methods, but the design was new. It depicted not just gears and hammers, but also a river for the restored water. And subtly woven into the scrollwork, the unmistakable shape of a birch leaf. It was his silent, massive apology, his attempt to make something beautiful and permanent for the town, inspired by the son he couldn't yet face. He worked on it for months, the physical labor of penance. The rumor of the old man's folly spread through Iron Cross. When Elias heard of it secondhand, a strange feeling settled in him, not triumph, but a cautious, aching recognition. The river of time and silence between them was still wide, but something was being built on the far shore. A gate, perhaps, waiting to be opened. The journey of the hammer was far from over, but the next strike would need to be the most precise of all. And so the final hammer falls, its echo ringing through the years. The broken has been made whole, the cast-off has become the cornerstone. But listen closely, for the fire in this forge is not yet cold. Elias' story asks us the most urgent question: what in your world is waiting to be salvaged? Not just objects, but relationships, forgotten skills, dormant dreams. What broken piece in your life or community holds a hidden song, a map to a stronger whole? This tale, like all true stories, is not an end. It is an invitation to pick up your own tools. Your next story begins here. In my workshop of words, I am a modern griot. I don't just tell stories, I forge maps for the spirit. On my channel, we gather to reclaim the timeless virtues, courage, integrity, community, and learn how to wield them in a fractured world. Subscribe now, and you will receive weekly sagas of resilience drawn from the fires of history and folklore. Practical parables for the creator, the healer, the builder, and the seeker. A fellowship of listeners who believe that old wisdom is the strongest alloy for modern life. Let us build a new legacy together. Click subscribe and ring the bell. Become part of a circle that remembers how to mend. When you join, tell me in the comments, what is the first broken thing, a skill, a connection, a belief, you feel called to pick up and reforge? I am here to tell the stories that remind you of your strength. Your journey is the next masterpiece in the making. Subscribe.